We'll talk about something called as RMI, which stands for it's remote. Oh, I missed it. It's remote method invocation. It's invocation. Now, in first place, we'll see why we require RMI. Now, see, let's suppose if you have a class A. So let's define a class A, and in this class, we'll be having lots of members like variables and methods. And let's say we have two variables int I comma j, and you'll be having a method called as show. You'll be having a method like display. You'll be having add. So you have all these methods here. And then you have class B. In this class B, you'll be having a main function, and you can, if you want to use this variables here, if you want to call this variables or methods from this class, what you need is you have to create an object, right? We have to build an has a relationship here. So we'll say new A, which means this obj here is your reference, and this new A here is your object, right? So this is your object, and this is your reference. Or you can say we have this reference obj to go to this object A. Now how it works is like, let me show you a diagram with this. I'm not a good painter, but we'll try. Let's imagine this is your system, and you'll be having two types of memory. One is your this is your stack memory, and you'll be having a heap memory here. Now how it works, when you create an object, like when you write this statement new A, it will create an object in your heap memory. Okay, this is your heap memory. You will be creating an object, and this object will have some address. Let's suppose this address is 102. Not a good painter, said you. So let's suppose we have 102. This is your address now. So this memory will have this object. We have an address called as 102. Then in this section, in your stack area, what you will be having is so what I can say, this will be your object name, which is obj, and the address of obj will be 102. So this is how it works, right? So in your system, you will be having a object with address 102, and then in stack memory, what you will be having is the reference and the address location of that object. Now here, like when I say when you create object of A, so we have this reference obj which is stored in heap, in stack, and the object is stored in heap memory. So next time when I say let's suppose if I say it's obj dot show, like we have defined this method here. If I say obj dot show, it will go to their stack memory. It will search for this object named as obj. It will check the location, which is 102, and it will call the location. Now the amazing part is both this type of memory, stack and heap, belongs to the same JVM or same machine. What if we have two different machines? So this stack belongs to machine 1, and this heap belongs to machine 2. So that means there will be two different JVM. Now this time when you say obj102, this will search for the same location or same heap memory in the JVM. But what we want to call this 102 object of another JVM. That is not possible directly using this statement, right? Because it will always search for the local memory. So what we have to create is we will be having this implementation on another machine, and we'll be having this class on another machine. So that means we have two different JVMs. So in this scenario, you have to call a method. You have to invoke a method which belongs to the remote machine, and for that we require a concept called as RMI. Implement RMI. Now see, when you talk about the implementation, we require some agreement between a client machine and a server machine, and that agreement is like on a client side, just like example, when you have this, we have these two machines. We have machine 1 and machine 2. In some reference, we can say this machine is client, and this machine will be server, because the implementation, that is this your object, is stored on server side, and the request will be sent from client machine, right? So this obj.show will be sent from client machine to a server machine. For this, we require some agreement between these two, and that is a client will have something called a stub and server will have something called a skeleton. So this is your stub. So this is your stub, and this part will be your skeleton. Okay, so we have this agreement between a client and a server with the help of stub and skeleton. And to work with this, the first step you have to create a remote interface. So first step is to create the remote interface. Next step we have is to provide the implementation. We have to provide the implementation of that interface. So we'll say implementation of remote interface. The third step we have to go for, we have to compile these files. We have to compile this file, and then we have to create, this is the first step, compile, and then you have to create stub and skeleton out of that implementation. So we have to say stub and skeleton. Now the software or tool we have to use here is RMI, which is your RMI compiler. It will create your stub and it will create a skeleton. Next step, you have to create the registry. Again, we'll see why we require registry here afterwards. And then we'll excuse me, and then we'll create a server, and we'll start the server. Okay, so start server. Again, ignore the background sound. It's my nephew who is making this sound, so please ignore. And then we'll create a client and we'll start the client application. So these are the steps we have to follow. First, we have to create a remote interface. Then we have to provide the implementation. Then we have to compile. Then we have to start the registry. Then we have to start with the server, and then we'll go for the client machine. Now, question arises: why we require this registry here? So in this example, we have this implementation here, right? So there are chances that we have lots of objects here. So there are chances we'll be having 3 objects, right? Then question arises, if a client calls show, which show it should call? Because we are not going for the address here. We will not focus on address. We'll be focused only on objects. And that's why every object will have a caption, or you can say a global name. Like this object will have A, this object will have C, this object will have B. Now these are their names, right? And this name need to be registered in a registry. So there will be a table here, somewhere here, a table, like there will be a table somewhere here. And in this table, what you will have is, this will record all the entries, like object 102 here will have a name A, object 103 will be having a name B. So that in future, if a stub calls for the object, it will not use the address, it will not use the name, or it will not use the object name, it will use the caption, or you can say a global name. So next time a stub want to access this object 102, it will use this caption as A. And that caption is stored in this registry, and that's why we have to start this registry. And the tool name here will be your RMI registry. It's registry. So we have to, first step we have to create a remote interface, then we have to provide the implementation, then we have to compile the implementation, and it will create stub and skeleton with the help of RMI tool. And then we have to start with registry, then we have to start the server, and then the client. This is how you have to implement RMI. Again, the practical example of this is the actual implementation of RMI. Now see, we have in the second part, we have talked about the steps. Now we'll implement the steps one by one. So for that, the first step, we have to create a remote interface, right? So for that, we'll open a new notepad file. We have to open a notepad file, not paint. Okay. In this notepad file, we have to create the implementation, right? We have to create an interface. For that, the first step is you have to create an interface. So we'll say public interface. We'll say this as add. Now we'll be going for the add application, in which we'll be having add server, which will add two numbers. For that, we'll say this is my add interface. In this add interface, we'll be having a method called as public int. So we'll say we'll have a public, it will return me an int value. The method name will be add. It will ask you for two parameters, int x and int y. That's it. So this is your interface. But we don't want to create a normal interface. We have to create a remote interface, right? Again, in interface, yeah. So we have to create a remote interface. And for that, to make it a remote interface, we have to extend it with a remote interface. So when you extend this interface, add I with remote interface, by default, this add I becomes a remote interface, the concept of inheritance. Now, since we are extending this interface remote, excuse me, yeah, we are extending this remote interface. What we have to do is we have to import the package as java.rmi.star. Again, we can just write here a remote to make it more efficient. So the package name is java.rmi. Since we are working with a remote implementation, there are chances that we will be getting an error. So that's why we have to say this throws the exception, so that it will handle the exception. Okay, and that is this is how you have to create a interface, right? Let's save this interface. We'll create a package here in my folder. We'll say new folder as RMI. Okay, we'll name this as RMI folder. And here I will store this with add.i.java. Okay. Now the next step we have to go for is we have to create the implementation. So in order to create the implementation, we have to create a class. So we'll say we'll create a new file now, new notepad file, and this is responsible to implement the interface. And we'll name this as add.c. This is the class of your interface, right? So we'll say add.c. A name doesn't matter, you can have any name. So we'll say add.c. And let's see how we have to implement this. First thing is we have to create a class because we are implementing the interface. And we'll name this as add.c. Now this class need to implement that remote interface, and that is your add.i, right? Then what next? We have to, we will say public int add. This is the implementation. It will take two parameters, int x and int y. And this need to return, this will return x plus y. So this will return x plus y. Now the thing is, whenever you work with this add.c, see, ultimately we have to, if you see these steps, we have to create stub and skeleton after from this add.c. To make it happen, we have to extend this class with unicast remote object. So this will be unicast remote object, so that you will get the features of remote object here. Now since we are extending this class with unicast remote object, we have to import the package, and that package is your java.rmi.server.star. Right, so this class unicast remote object belongs to a package called as server. Now the thing is, there are chances that we'll be getting errors for this unicast remote object. Now, as a class add.c, we can handle the exceptions, right? But we have to implement we have to handle the exception of this unicast remote object, and to do that, we'll define a constructor add.c. We'll define this add.c. Okay, this is your constructor now. And to handle the exception by a unicast remote object, what we can do is we can say throws exception. Okay, and we'll call the constructor of this unicast remote object with the help of a method called as super. So how it works, when you create object of this add.c now, it will call this add.c constructor. It indirectly will call super, which will handle the exception called as throws exception, right? So ultimately we are handling all the exceptions, and this is how you have to implement a class. Talked about the implementation of this remote interface. This is your class. So what we have done till now is we have created a add interface as add I. Then we have created the implementation of this as the class name was add C. Now the next step is we have to compile this class and we have to compile a remote interface. That will do after we have created the server. So that we'll see in a sync now. It's not always compulsory to follow these steps. We can have our own steps here. So what we'll do, I will not start the server. I will just create the server and it will just create the client. Okay. So the first step, the next step will do is we'll create the server. Okay. And for that, we'll require one more notepad file. Now to implement this server, what we have to create a class, a public class as server. And then in this class, I want to run this class independently. So that for that, we have to do public static void main. A main function we require because it will run independently. And then we have this arguments. Now, as you know, we will be defining those methods. We will be calling that method add, which throws the exceptions. So by default, this main function need to throw the exceptions or exception. Okay. And for now, the next step is now we have to create object of that add C. We'll name this first. We'll save this file. We'll say server.java. Now we have to create of that add C because this add C, this implementation will be on server side. So we'll say add C equal to new add C. This is one of the JVM. Now the next step will be, now we have to link this object obj as we seen here. We have to link this object obj with our RMI registry, right? So we have to register this name here, and to register that name, we have to use something, a function called as rebind. So rebind is responsible to assign a caption to an object, and we'll say the caption is add, or we'll say capital add, and we'll say object name is obj. So this is your obj and this is your caption add. Now this rebind method is a static method which belongs to a class called as naming. So we'll say naming.rebind. That's it. And once it is done, we'll say the server is started. So system.out.println. What we'll do is we'll say server started. Okay. That's it. We have done with the server. But since we are working with this class naming.rebind, we have to import a package. And that's why what we'll do is we'll say import. We'll say import java.rmi.star. It will fetch the packages. Okay, that was your server. We'll not run this file. First, we'll create a client machine so that we'll see the effect of this. Now, to create a client machine, we'll require one more file. One more notepad file. Again, still now we have created three Java files. This is fourth one. So this is your client.java. This is your fourth Java file. Now, to create a client machine, we require again a public class. We'll name this as client. And in this, we require a main function. So we'll say public static void main, which will accept a string arguments. Again, we know we'll be calling that method add, so it will throw the exception. So we'll say throws exception. And the next step. Now we have to create object of add, right? So see, ultimately what we need, we have to call that method called as add. By passing two values, we can take input from user, or for time being, we'll say we have to add this to number 5 and 4. The output I'm expecting is 9, right? So I will take this input and will store this variable in n. So n equal to add 5, 4. Now I don't know where is the implementation, because the implementation will be stored on server, and for that we need to call this object. Now see, we have to create object, right? Again, we cannot create object of this class is because we don't know where is the class. We don't know what's the add class, right, or add C, because it belongs to server side. What we know as a client will be knowing the interface, and the interface in which we'll have this method add is called as add I, we'll name this object as obj equal to. Now I don't we cannot do add a new add I, right, because this is your interface. So what we need is we need an object of that implementation. Like if I create object of add C here, if I create object of add C here, it will work. But as a client, you don't know where is the add C, right? For that, we will ask for the RMI registry to give me the name or to give me the object. So we'll say naming.lookup which object I need. Any object with caption add will do. Any object with caption add will do. Now it will give you the object, this one, as we have done here. When you say add, I've done some case problem. So this is the caption is add, right? Now here, what we have in server code, we have defined a caption add for this object, right? And the same object we need here. So what the client will do, it will search for the caption, and what ultimately you will getting is obj. Now we don't want object of a class, we require object of interface, so we'll do a typecasting here, and that's it. You got the object, and then you have to call obj.add. Now it will call that object, and then we'll print the value of this n. So we'll say system.out.println, and in this we'll print n. Or to be more specific, we'll say addition is : plus. So it will give me output as addition is 9. But again, we are using this class naming, so we have to import a package. So we'll say import java.rmi.star. That's it. Now we have done with the client implementation, we have done with the server implementation. Now let's follow the steps. Now the steps are we have to create a stub and skeleton, or we have to compile all the files first. With the implementation of all the classes, we have created an interface add C, we have created the implementation, then we have created the server, then we have created its client. Now this step is very important because in this we'll be doing the actual compilation. So the first step, you have to create a client CMD and we'll create a server CMD. So first we'll create a server CMD. Again, which folder I'm in my home folder, which is Krishna. I have to move to that folder called as in E drive. I have a folder RMI. Okay, so here to compile this file we require javac, which is not there. Excuse me. Now just to call this javac from here, we have to set the part of Java. So we'll say program files Java JDK bin. Now let's see javac is there. Yeah, it's there. Okay. Now again, we can use the we can set the environment variables, but in this example I'm not going for that. So we'll directly say set path. We require one more thing. We require one more CMD as client. So we'll say we'll move to RMI. Okay, we have to set the path here also. Let's see program files Java JDK and bin. Now, so we have a client machine and a server machine. Let's check Java is there. Yeah. So this is your client and this is your server. This is your server, this is your client. Now the first step, we have to compile all the files, right? And to compile the files, we have to type javac, and then we have to mention each file name. Or what you can say is, we have to compile all the Java files. Let me show you how it. We have this. In this drive, we have RMI, and this we have 4 Java folders. See this, we have 4 Java files. Now after compilation, I hope we don't have any errors here, and yes, we don't have any error. And now you can see we have 4 Java files and 4 class files. Okay, so all the compilation is done now. Now next step, we have to create a stub and skeleton of that file. Now to create a stub and skeleton, now you can see we have what we have here. We have 4 class files and 4 Java files. In total, we have 8 files. But what happens after this statement is, let's create a stub and skeleton. How to create stub and skeleton? We have to type RMIC and the implementation class name, which is add C. And now when I say enter, okay, with the new version, it will give some deprecation warning, but no issue. We don't want any deprecation here. Okay, now what we have is, in total we have 9 files. You can see we have one more class as added, which is Stub. Again, you cannot see a skeleton because it belongs to server side. So what we can see is only Stub. Okay, that was a step. We got Stub and skeleton. Now next step what we have is we have to start the RMI registry. Now to start RMI registry, the statement is we have to say start RMI registry and enter. Now this is your RMI registry. Again, it will give, firewall will try to block it. We have to allow it. We don't have choice. Yeah, so the RMI registry started now. So we have done with all the steps. The next step, we have to start a server. To start a server, it's very simple. You have to say Java server, enter, and now you can see server started. Now from the client machine, this is your client CMD. We can just say Java, we'll say client, and enter, and the addition is 9, right? So this is how you implement RMI. Again, what you can do is you can change the logic. You can implement RMI for factorial. You can implement RMI for accounting software. You can implement RMI for financial software. You can do anything, but the basic steps are this 6. Simple, right? So I hope you got the idea of